I grab my coat and my heart and soul shoes and walk among the groups of two. It's not ideal, it's just how we feel. It's a shame we're easily amused. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Cast a stone and get a hardcore view. Catchphrase of the day is that it's true. There's no coffee talk and only one way to please. It's a shame what you do moves me. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Yeah, I'm not looking for a windswept view. Our change has changed. Nothing's new. Right heart, new song. That knows. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. If I could know what would do wrong, I'd take this my own. The only cure for this forward motion is my own. The only cure for this forward motion is my own. The only cure for this forward motion.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Rebellious 1776. My name is Lynn Hurley, and I am here with you to critique, criticize, and fact check our nation's politicians in real time. We love watching a sassy congressional hearing around here, and we are going to have a very sassy conversation, let me tell you. But we like watching them because we want to know just what those sneaky little politicians are saying, and more importantly, where our hard-earned tax dollars are going. And so if you know someone else who would like to know that information, and honestly, who wouldn't, please feel free to share the love and share the show, and then just sit back, grab yourself a snack and a drink. And with today's conversation, that may need to be an alcoholic one. I'm going to be honest. But if you're watching live, please do join us in the chat as we watch our nation's finest in action. And if you do like talking all things politics, why not go ahead and just hit that subscribe button? It's not going to hurt you. Give it a little. Oh my good. Osama bin Laden is struck. She has struck. I don't know what that is. Mayday, Mayday. Dave Hurley, if you hear me. We'll have to go see what the heck just happened. She just came running out of the room, totally distracted me. But you know what? It is what it is. So it happens, right? It's a live show. These things happen. So Dave Hurley is on the situation, everybody. It's going to be okay. How are you guys? Hey, Hellfire, how's it going? You made it. I don't know where everyone else is, though. We're right here. We're right here with you, my man. Speaking of Dave Hurley is here. Hey, XJ, how's it going? Hi, Andrew, how's it going? Okay, guys, let's get into this. So we are going to have a conversation today. But, I originally wasn't going to do a hearing. I was just going to do a talk on this particular topic, which is you, whether you know it or not, already have a social credit score. Yes, just like communist China, you have a social credit score and you don't even know it. But I found a hearing from last year. So this whole system started with companies. And I found a hearing from last year that talks a little bit about this. So we're going to watch that first because it's going to give us a good groundwork for this conversation. So sit back, relax. As per usual, I will be in the chat with you. And I'm going to be stopping and commenting probably a little more than usual in this one because this is a really important topic and something that needs to be out there. You need to know what's going on. But let me get this up and going, and then we're going to watch this hearing. And nope, that's not it. This one right here. I'm sorry. It starts out with Jamie Raskin. There's nothing I can do about that. But let me know how the sound is, and meet me in the chat, guys, because we're going to have a lot to talk about here.
Which has already cost businesses, government, pensioners, and consumers billions and billions of dollars. Amazingly, the fossil fuel industry wants Big Brother now to march in and stop the free market from responding to the climate crisis that the carbon kings created. I hope that we will bring in this process, Mr. Chairman, real business people and other private asset managers and investment advisors to testify about how outrageous and indefensible it is to assault the free market in this way. It's clear that honest American businesses are not buying the propaganda of climate denialism. They have a duty of loyalty and care to their shareholders, and they're focused on the actual bottom line. And that always means, as we will hear from the minority witness today, facing reality, facing the real risks and costs that businesses encounter, not swallowing a bunch of mythology and lies. America's most successful investors and asset managers have voluntarily and freely embraced responsible investment principles as a fulfillment of their legal fiduciary duty to minimize risk, maximize returns, and prudently plan for long-term challenges like the ones associated with climate change. That is the freedom, and that's the decision that the fossil fuel industry and its supporters want to destroy. But responsible investing works, and we have the opportunity to explain it today. The proof is in the pudding. Over the last decade, Bloomberg's ESG index performed dramatically better than Standard & Poor's traditional fossil fuel-based index. Consider this remarkable contrast on the sign behind me. Now, the ESG index is obviously performing a lot better than the general stock index, but I would never say, Mr. Chairman, because of these stunning trend lines, which smart investors will certainly take note of, I would never say that the states or the federal government should force all investors or asset managers to steer all their investments into ESG stocks like wind or solar or conservation or whatever. I would never say that. If there are investors who want to continue to invest in just big gas and big coal and big oil, that is totally their prerogative and right to do so, and I would never interfere with that. But one can only regard with amazement the fact that the fossil fuel industry is using their massive wealth and power now to try to force investment funds, asset managers, unions, pension funds, and businesses to invest in the less successful carbon-dominated stocks. It makes sense to say in the free market that no one should be forced to do the demonstrably right thing with their money, but it is appalling to say that everyone should be forced to do the demonstrably wrong thing with their money. Let's let the free market operate. The new campaign against what Tocqueville called the enlightened self-interest of American business comes dressed as an attack on woke capitalism, the same epithet used by Governor DeSantis in his attack on the Disney Corporation, which has backfired so badly on him. Although every other word coming out of their mouths these days is woke, our friends have proven famously unable to define what they mean by woke. So I did a little research, and I want to help with the etymology of the word. Woke comes from the Indo-European root weg, which means to be strong, lively, alert. That root grew into woke, awake, wakefulness, but it also grew into the closely related word vigilance. And I think vigilance is probably the best definition of woke as you guys are using it. The whole point of being a fiduciary is to be vigilant,
not how they're using it,
watchful,
Jamie.
and alert to opportunities and risks. And that's what asset managers, corporate board members, and executives do with other people's money. The opposite of a vigilant, woke investment strategy is a negligent and inattentive investment strategy. Or to put it more simply, when it comes to climate change, if you don't have a woke capitalism, you're going to have a broke capitalism. Responsible investing principles, including ESGs, have been freely chosen by America's companies and employed by asset managers and pension fund managers for decades. Right-wing attacks on these principles, fueled by dark money, corporate special interests, and flawed legal arguments, threaten now the savings and retirement of Americans by forcing asset managers to ignore material risks and considerations and violate their fiduciary duties. And we're hearing this from all over America. After Kentucky passed a law in April of last year to divest state funds from financial companies that used ESG principles, the county employment retirement system responded that the requirement was, quote, inconsistent with its fiduciary responsibilities. An analysis by the Kansas Public Employees Retirement System of anti-ESG legislation proposed in the state found that it, quote, could cause more than $1 billion in losses due to the early sale of assets and could reduce returns by $3.6 billion over the next decade. In August of 2022, the Florida State Board of Administration divested its pension from BlackRock due to the asset manager's ESG commitments. And in May 2023, Governor DeSantis signed into law a bill prohibiting state and local government funds and pensions from considering any social, political, or ideological factors. Analysis by the Sunrise Project indicates that because of these incomprehensible actions, Florida stands to spend between $97 million and $361 million more on municipal bonds alone to satisfy this new anti-woke political correctness standard. These anti-ESG laws threaten American retirements, especially those of public workers like teachers and firefighters and librarians. At the end of the day, the only way for asset managers to meet their fiduciary duties is to allow them the freedom to invest, focusing on what will provide the greatest return for their beneficiaries that they have a fiduciary duty to. Even if you favor as a personal financial strategy exclusive investment in oil and coal, you should not be interfering with the rights of others to make other decisions, especially when their decisions have been yielding significantly higher returns.
Be interfering with the rights of others.
Gentleman yields back. I'm pleased to welcome our three witnesses today who are all statewide elected officials. But first, I yield to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, to introduce his good friend and our very first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to welcome Steve Marshall, Alabama's 48th Attorney General. Attorney General Marshall has done an excellent job as Alabama's AG. He is so well esteemed that virtually every district attorney in Alabama attended his inauguration. And it's been a privilege, a personal privilege, to have worked with Attorney General Marshall on some issues involving state and federal interest. I would like to also recognize a former colleague of mine, Catherine Robertson, who is the Deputy Attorney General of the state of Alabama, in attendance today. And Attorney General Marshall, welcome to the Oversight Committee, and we look forward to your testimony. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Next, Attorney General Sean Reyes. It takes me a minute. Thank you. Was appointed by the governor to serve the people of Utah as Attorney General in 2013. He was then elected in 2014 and has since been reelected twice. Our third witness is Treasurer Michael Frericks. Mr. Frericks first elected as the 74th Treasurer of the state of Illinois in 2015 and is now in his third term in office. I look forward to hearing from Attorneys General Reyes and Marshall, as well as Treasurer Frericks, on their experiences with ESG investment strategies. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. Now we'll begin with opening statements, and we'll begin with General Marshall.
Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Steve Marshall, and it's my honor to serve as Attorney General for the state of Alabama. Alabama law, like the laws of many states, empowers me to represent the state's interests in court and to enforce the state's consumer protection laws. ESG poses unique challenges to Alabama's energy consumers, as well as many of our state's leading industries, like steel, iron, coal, agriculture, timber, and oil and gas. But it's bigger than just Alabama. ESG is a clear and present danger to consumers and to our democracy. An unelected cabal of global elites is using ESG to hijack our capitalist system, capture corporations, and threaten hard-earned dollars of American workers.
Yes, Steve.
Since President Trump's election, the global elites have formed at least 10 alliances dedicated to implementing radical ESG plans. These alliances threaten consumers by limiting output, raising prices, risking retirement funds, and creating anti-competitive conduct. They also undermine our system of government because unelected elites are making policy decisions outside of democratic processes. Groups like Climate Action 100 and Net Zero Banking Alliance require their members to coordinate on business activity to meet ESG standards not otherwise required by law. This private coordination is designed to accomplish what could not be done through normal democratic processes or the free market. ESG requires companies to forego otherwise profitable economic transactions to achieve woke social policy. These global alliances hurt consumers by breaching fiduciary duties. Those entities entrusted with Americans' money have a fiduciary duty to act in their investors' sole interest by maximizing returns. Yet ESG acolytes have openly pledged allegiance to causes over profits, often failing to give consumers adequate notice or any meaningful say in the decision to virtue signal with their hard-earned dollars. ESG is not good for American workers. The retirement savings of many Americans are invested, advised, or affected by an entity that's participating in a net zero alliance. Woke agendas should not impact how retirement dollars of workers are invested. Americans who are responsibly saved for retirement should be confident that their money is invested in a manner to maximize returns and not further the goals of agenda-driven investment managers. ESG also hurts consumers by increasing energy prices. To accomplish their net zero goals, these alliances must work to phase out fossil fuels. Energy output is then limited, which results in higher prices for consumers. And in states like Alabama, under these policies, consumers would only face higher prices, but also a lack of energy supply altogether. ESG threatens America's energy independence and national security. America achieved energy independence during the Trump administration, but ESG weakens America by constricting foundational economic sectors like energy, such that we now must beg foreign countries for oil. ESG also makes America dependent on products made in China like solar panels and electric battery components. This threatens to give China and other bad actors a competitive advantage and leverage against the United States. These alliances also hurt consumers through anti-competitive conduct. Alliance members appear to be conspiring and combining to restrain trade and commerce by colluding with other members to reduce competition amongst themselves and coordinating restricted investment and action towards specific companies unless ESG policy objectives are implemented. And let's be clear, ESG activity is subject to antitrust laws, as the Biden administration has publicly confirmed. ESG threatens America's democratic system. In this country, important policy decisions are supposed to be made through the process set forth in the Constitution. Congress debates issues and passes legislation. The president signs and enforces legislation, and the judiciary reviews any challenged legislation. The global elites are using ESG alliances to circumvent our system of government by shifting power to unelected elites, both inside and outside the United States, who are not accountable to American voters. Global elites are advancing ESG through unlawful and anti-democratic means, but Republican attorneys general are fighting back to protect consumers from harm caused by woke ESG policy. Republican attorney generals have launched investigations in the Net Zero Banking Alliance, Climate Action 100, and other companies, commented on policy proposals, warned companies to not violate the law, and initiated litigation where warranted. Republican attorneys generals are defending Americans from these global elites and radical ESG activists. We appreciate the attention this committee and members of Congress are giving to ESG. This conversation and debate is one that must be returned to you, our nation's policymakers. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time of being here today.
Thank you, General Reyes.
Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you on this important issue of whether environmental, social, and governance, or ESG factors, are distorting our financial system and harming consumers and working-class Americans. ESG involves some of the biggest and most powerful players in the global economy, forcing costly operational changes on American companies in pursuit of the 2015 Paris Agreement goals. These goals have never been adopted as yet by Congress, but contemplate changes to our way of life that are far-reaching and fundamental. It would impact everything from how we grow our food and what we eat to how we power our homes and businesses. These changes involve balancing multiple trade-offs, including financial costs and benefits, how quickly or slowly the government imposes new technologies, and how reliable of a power grid we will have. My view is that we should trust consumers, promote American energy independence or even dominance, and avoid as much regulation as possible. But answering these difficult and critical policy questions is the role of the people's elected representatives in our Republican form of democracy. That would be each of you in Congress and state and local policymakers, not me or unelected bureaucrats, foreign governments, asset managers, proxy companies, or anyone else. But ever since the signing of the Paris Agreement, there's been an open conspiracy to bypass Congress using the power of horizontal agreements by key players in our financial system. Some of these groups are Climate Action 100, the Glasgow Alliance for Net Zero, which include the largest asset managers, banks, and insurance companies globally. These horizontal organizations seek to use their collective market power over tens of trillions in assets to force burdensome changes on American companies. Such changes drive up the cost of goods and they harm shareholders by reducing returns. In sum, ESG is an undemocratic tax on our economy and productivity. ESG also weakens Americans' national security and that of our allies for all the reasons that my colleague outlined. Many renewables require rare earth elements and other supply chain needs that are dominated by China. Thus, adopting these fundamental changes to our energy supply provides China even more leverage over our economy and security. The various problems with ESG present a multifaceted topic beyond the scope of any single hearing. But in addition to the more macro ESG concerns that General Marshall and I have raised, I present three very specific ESG concerns to you today. These are areas the committee can and should investigate further. The first is the role of asset manager agreements on utility companies and whether the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, is doing its job to ensure asset managers who collectively own significant percentages of utility stock are improperly influencing the operations of those utilities. The second is the role of proxy advisory firms in making recommendations for share voting that are based on the goals of pressure groups rather than shareholders' best interests. In one particular case, this includes a proposal for considering race in insurance underwriting, which violates applicable anti-discrimination laws and therefore should not even be on proxy statements. The third is the recent Department of Labor rule allowing ERISA fiduciaries to consider collateral factors in investments in shareholder voting. This is a severe weakening of the fiduciary rule, and I applaud you, the bipartisan action that you took in Congress to repeal this rule under the CRA. It's only because of the president's veto that this rule presently stands. And I'm proud to be leading a coalition of 26 states, along with private parties challenging this rule in court. In conclusion, I'm not here to debate the policy of E, S, or G. There is a time and place for that. And while it may not be today or in this committee, I am convinced it is in this larger body of Congress where such policy should be determined. So if I'm not here to dispute or defend policy, what is my purpose? I'm here to warn you about the process involved in effectuating ESG goals. No matter how much you may agree with the policy being pushed, if you deconstruct the process, it is a flawed and dangerous one and may also be illegal. The process threatens your prerogative as representatives of the people. It gives no consideration to checks and balances or separation of powers. It ignores the rule of law. It undermines our American system of lawmaking, however inefficient and vexing it may be at times. The process focuses all the power centers of the financial sector into one organized syndicate of pressure. Whenever such a concentrated array of power conspires together for a specific outcome, we must be wary. As state AGs, we will exercise our power to expose these entanglements and protect consumers. We hope you will use your power to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Treasurer Frericks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Comer. Good morning, Ranking Member Raskin and members of the committee. My name is Michael Frericks, and I am the Illinois State Treasurer. I am the state's Chief Investment and Banking Officer, and in that role, my office manages approximately $52 billion. The portfolio includes about $26 billion in state funds, around $17 billion in college savings and retirement funds, and about $9 billion on behalf of local and state governments. I also serve as a trustee of the Illinois State Board of Investment, which manages approximately $28 billion in pension assets on behalf of about 230,000 beneficiaries. It is my job to protect and grow the hard-earned savings of families across the state, as well as funds that state and local units of government depend upon. I take this responsibility very seriously. Whether it's the single mom trying to save for her kid's college tuition, or the town financing new schools, I know they are trusting the Treasurer's office to grow returns on those funds over the long term and ensure that they have the money they need in the meantime. I am tasked with investing not just for the next quarter, but with the goal of maximizing returns over the next quarter century. This is what brought me here today. We are witnessing a widespread, highly coordinated, politically motivated attack on investors and the hardworking people they serve. This pushback is anti-free market and anti-investor. It is misleading and it is harmful. It harms retirement savers, pensioners, working people, businesses, and it harms America. This coordinated campaign is focused on ESG investing. Most people don't know what ESG is. ESG is data. ESG is simply additional information that investment professionals use to assess risk and return prospects. It is about value, not about values. In order to maximize returns, an investor must be able to manage and mitigate risk. The more data we as investors have, the better informed our decisions are when selecting investments over the long term. ESG is about looking at a wider range of risks and value opportunities that can have a material financial impact on investment performance. For example, if you're investing in a pharmaceutical company, it's thinking about whether that company has exposure to massive lawsuits because of its role in the opioid epidemic. Our approach is to integrate material ESG factors into investment decisions along with many other considerations. We are not ignoring traditional financial factors like profitability and creditworthiness. We are integrating more data into our decisions to give us a better idea of risk and growth prospects. This approach is backed by academic research, but it's also common sense. Companies that value their workers have less turnover and higher productivity. Companies that build a strong corporate governance structure will be more resilient and valuable over the long term. While I welcome healthy debate about best practices and fiduciary duty, I do not welcome the deployment of blacklists and overreaching legislation that would strip professionals of their freedom to invest responsibly. I do not welcome decrees that ignore the research, fundamentally misunderstand the role of fiduciaries, and impose real costs on taxpayers, pensioners, and hardworking families. When it comes to material data, it's irresponsible to tell investment professionals to ignore information that they can use to do their jobs better. Frankly, I'm
Also
deeply concerned by the
irresponsible to
highly
force
orchestrated
them
attacks
to
on the investment
publish that
profession
information.
and the focus on restricting investors' freedom to exercise their professional discretion and fiduciary duty. To ask investment professionals to ignore material risks and investment opportunities is asking us to stop doing our jobs. For example, should we ignore when healthcare companies understaff their operations and jeopardize the safety of patients? Would you expect a company that does this to continue to increase in shareholder value? It would be
No, but that's on
irresponsible to
that
ignore these
company.
issues like these. It
They
would be
will start
foolish
having
to
issues.
hinder professionals'
That is what a
abilities
free
and their
market is.
freedom to invest responsibly. This AstroTurf opposition to decades of work by investment professionals is a dangerous intrusion in our free market system. If unchecked, this war on investors will stifle economic growth, cost taxpayers and pensioners billions of dollars, as many studies have already found, and it will obstruct investors' ability to protect and grow people's hard-earned savings. In closing, now is not the time to stop investors from considering prudent data that can lead to better returns over the long term. The American economy depends on investors. Please let us do our jobs. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Without objection, Representative Magaziner will be waived on the committee for the purpose of asking question at today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And I want to remind our witnesses and the members before we enter into the question and answer phase that we have a 5-minute clock, and we try to adhere to that 5-minute time frame. If someone asks a question and the 5 minutes expires, we'll give you an opportunity to answer it, but please be mindful. We have a lot of questioners, and we want to get through this also. We'll begin questioning. Recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Part of the
Mr. Clay
focus of
Higgins.
our hearing today is based upon a recent letter signed by 21 attorneys general highlighting how organizations, including asset managers and proxy advisors, could be violating state and federal law to channel funds for political objectives in the category of ESG, environmental, social, and government practices. One of our witnesses exclaimed that we're asking him to stop doing his job. We're not asking you to stop doing your job, good sir. We just expect to review whether or not some of your colleagues are violating the law in the course of doing their job. From the second paragraph of that letter, which was signed, by the way, again, Mr. Chairman, by 21 attorney generals, the second signature on that letter, I'd like to submit for the record the opening statement of my own attorney general, my colleague and friend, Attorney General Jeff Landry, former congressman here in this body, was not able to attend the hearing today, but I'd like to submit his statement for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From the second paragraph of the letter signed by so many of our attorneys general addressing asset managers, these companies are some of the largest asset managers in the United States. It's important for the American people watching to grasp this. Collectively controlling trillions of dollars of investments. Many individuals and organizations count on these asset managers to provide sound investment products and advice. The top 3 asset managers alone cast about a quarter of the votes for the S&P 500 company shareholder meetings. They are therefore not only bound to follow the general laws discussed, but also have extensive responsibilities under both federal and state laws governing securities. Broadly, those laws require asset managers to act as a fiduciary and in the best interest of clients, exercising due care and loyalty. Simply put, asset managers are not the same as political or social activists and should not allow vast savings entrusted to be commandeered by activists like ESG activist organizations. So, Attorney General Reyes, I'd like to address the question to you, sir, regarding to clarify for America, what legal requirements must asset managers who act as fiduciaries adhere to when investing on behalf of a client? And how do these requirements impact investment decision makings? And I'm going to ask you to address not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law that we're inquiring about today.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I'll try to be brief, and it's very simple. Their duty is a fiduciary duty. Under laws like ERISA, it is the highest of all duties that one can owe to another in a fiduciary relationship. And that fiduciary duty requires them investing assets on behalf of others to maximize shareholder value, to maximize return back to the shareholder. It's as simple as that. That has been the rule, the prime directive, if you will, for generations. And it served our market and it served our nation well.
How would you assess, for the committee and for Americans viewing this hearing, how would you assess, Attorney General Reyes, the performance of ESG investment versus traditional investment?
I believe there are a number of studies that show that ESG funds have globally underperformed. So my data contradicts the data that we saw earlier from the ranking member. If I recall, and there are multiple studies, but I'll point to one, over the past 5 years, global ESG funds have underperformed the broader markets by more than 250 basis points per year, an average 6.3% return compared with an 8.9% return. So in other words, an investor who put $10,000 into an average global ESG fund in 2017 would have about $13,500 today, compared with $15,250 investment in the broader market. So that's one example from one study or some market research that demonstrates that ESG is not necessarily a good bet, and that asset managers should, again, be investing in the best interests of their beneficiaries or the shareholders, not for a prescribed outcome that's dictated by these horizontal agreements and pushed and pressured by organizations like NZAM and Climate Action 100.
I thank General Reyes for his clarification there. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Frericks, you said that ESG is data. And some people call it ESG, some people call it responsible investing, some people just call it exercise of fiduciary obligations. But in any event, you're saying what's under attack is data. How could more data hurt?
More data cannot hurt. More data is what we need as investors to make good decisions. I liken this to these attacks of states that would prescribe asset managers or proxy advisors providing this data for us, is to making us pick a fantasy football team without knowing the players' weights, their injury status, their track record. You can't make good decisions without useful, pertinent information. And that's what ESG is.
Go into a time machine for a second, if you could. How does your job differ from someone who was the treasurer of Illinois 50 years ago? I mean, back in those days, it seemed like it'd be simple if you were trying to do the valuation for an auto company. How many autos are pumped out every year and number of man hours that go into and so on. How is the valuation of companies different today in 2023 than it was 50 years ago?
The nature of value in the S&P 500 has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. If you look back in the early 1970s, it was probably somewhere between 75 to 80% of the total value of the S&P 500 was intangible assets. Things like cars, things like paper, things like pencils. And you could do an analysis, financial analysis, how many acres of forest you have under contract, and you could see how many cars and pencils you could produce, and you could reach a value. Today, the S&P 500 has about 80% of the value in things like brands, intellectual property. And those things are subject to different risks than those companies 50 years ago. We are just trying to guard against those risks. A company like Google is not worth how much it is today because the number of petaflops of data they have is based on their reputation. Apple is not worth $1 trillion because of the number of iPhones they sell, but because of their reputation. And those are susceptible to social and governance risks.
Well, you know, some of the disagreement here is about facts, and I appreciate what Attorney General Reyes just said. He made the claim that the ESG informed investments do more poorly than the Standard & Poor's General. Our data is completely different from that, showing that it's been overperforming. I'd like your comments on that, but then I'd like you to comment on this. Let's say Utah sees it differently than Illinois. Is there any problem with you pursuing the investment strategy you want and Utah pursuing the investment strategy they want?
Investing is not easy. Some people want to put more work into it than others. If someone doesn't want to look at this data, that's fine. They have that freedom. Nothing in ESG prescribes that someone has to consider these sources. I would say they would be not fulfilling their fiduciary duty if they didn't, but they had that right to. And I would cite other studies like a New York study, Stern School of Business, a recent meta-study, which is a statistical analysis that combines the results of multiple academic studies. Looked at 245 individual studies on ESG and financial performance. The study found a positive relationship between ESG and financial performance for 58% of those studies. Only 8% showed a negative relationship. You can pick and choose. Any investment strategy will have quarters where it performs better than others. You can pick and choose, but over time, ESG has been a good set of data to help us make better investments.
And you make that judgment as a financial expert who has a fiduciary duty to everybody in Illinois, right?
I have a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries of those pension funds, the beneficiaries of those college savings funds. I don't have a fiduciary duty to the oil and gas industry.
But you've got a fiduciary duty to maximize the returns. And what you're saying is you want more information. Like somebody says, this Purdue company just got 57% in the last quarter. Invest in Purdue. What about saying, well, that's all that you could do at that point? You can't look at whether or not they're trying to get people addicted to drugs because that would be too woke.
That was exactly what happened with Purdue Pharma. If you looked at their financial returns, they showed themselves to be a very profitable company. But we wanted to know more because there are risks associated with selling highly addictive drugs.
Oh, so that's a real case for you.
Real case. Yeah. Reputational risks, regulatory risks, litigation risk. And those litigation risks took a company that was very profitable for a long time and bankrupted it.
Okay, this is my final question. Why shouldn't Congress say, well, you know what? We're the House of Representatives. The anti-ESG people, we're in control. We're going to stop states like Illinois from looking at all the data. What's wrong with that?
Well, that is what some states are doing, and it is costing those states not insignificant amounts of money. You pointed out some of those. The state of Indiana, their pension system said it's going to cost an additional $6.7 billion to comply with their anti-ESG law. The state of Kansas, it's about $3.6 billion. The state of Kentucky, the Kentucky pension system, said if forced to comply with their state's anti-ESG law, they would not be following their fiduciary.
They would rather be broke than woke. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gosar of Arizona for 5 minutes.
Attorney General Reyes, you just heard the comment about science. This is about data. Can you dispute that?
Thank you. A couple of things I want to comment on. I think my colleague mentioned that more data is all good, right? And that more data cannot hurt. I disagree with that because I think there can be bad data if it distracts or in some cases even distorts the import and the focus of what fiduciaries should be solely laser focused on. If it's not benign data, I'll give you an example. Standard & Poor's issued ESG indicators alongside the credit worthiness for states. In a state like Utah that has a AAA credit rating, Standard & Poor's would point out in one instance the issue of drought without taking into consideration a whole other host of mitigating factors that Utah has, anti-drought measures. By itself and without the context, Standard & Poor's all of a sudden makes it look like the most important factor is not Utah's creditworthiness over a long history, a AAA credit rating, but one particular factor of drought. And in that instance, it illustrates my point of distortion. My colleague used the fantasy football analogy, and all data is good data, I guess, in kind of a Moneyball sense. Again, I would take issue with that. And to use football as an example, if all of a sudden we started crowning the Super Bowl champion, not by who scored the most points in the game, but by who had the most green arena or who had the most environmentally friendly equipment, I think that data would be destructive. I think that's something that is not necessarily the indicator that we're looking for. And in this instance, again, I want to point out that we're contesting the process, and you can have all the data in the world, but when that data is driven to one particular outcome, and it's predetermined outcome, and then there is a cabal of players who are all pushing towards that one outcome, then the data is just window dressing to achieve that particular outcome.
It's manipulated. Would you give me that?
Yeah, I want to quote from NZAM, which is has 59 trillion AUM, assets under management. And this commitment is that it's consistent, it's ambition for all assets under management to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. That's all of their assets. And it says this: the transition to net zero will be the biggest transformation in economic history. Our industry's ability to drive the transition to net zero is extremely powerful. Without our industry on board, the goals set out in the Paris Agreement will be difficult to meet. Again, and I could read chapter and verse of many other public statements like this. This just demonstrates the concerted effort by all of these organizations to push a particular outcome, regardless of what the data may or may not.
Now, I'm going to cite a quote. BlackRock's former CIO for sustainable investment even said in an article for Medium in 2021 that ESG investing, quote, provided for the opportunity for a bump in what were otherwise plummeting fees as competition had grown in recent years. So maybe if we looked at this, maybe if we went back to the Fisher investment. Fisher investment says when our clients do better, we do better, instead of having these commissions on here. Do you think that's an opportunity to get things right?
I definitely think that's an opportunity, Congressman. And let me also mention something that was said. Just because it's not mandated, I think that was a reference. This data, you're not forced to look at it. Just because it's not mandated does not make it any more legal. If it's allowed, again, it's data that distracts from a fiduciary's sole responsibility to maximize shareholder value.
I got one more thing. You brought up FERC in regards to energy. So are you aware that we were dangerously close to having a nationwide blackout earlier this year? And what did that play in that investment portfolio in regards to where we get our energy, intermittent versus baseload energy?
That's what several FERC commissioners testified to just last week in a Senate hearing, Congressman. That efforts to transition to cleaner energy is happening so fast, too fast, that it would have catastrophic effects on reliability and security of our electric grid.
We're actually outpushing our science. And you have to have dependable science that is peer-reviewed and is repeatable. So thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Ocasio-Cortez from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you very
God,
much,
plug your
Mr.
ears,
Chair.
everyone.
Mr. Frericks, if you had to describe your job to a layperson, how would you describe it in one or two sentences?
I'm the Chief Investment Officer. My job is to maximize returns for the state of Illinois and our beneficiaries.
And your beneficiaries are the citizens and folks who reside in the state of Illinois, correct?
The citizens of the state, they're the participants in college savings plans and retirement savings plans and retiree pensioners.
So everyday people saving for college, saving for retirement, and who really just want to make sure they can put their dollar in a long-term investment that is stable, correct?
Most of these people put their money in and they expect not to look at the next quarter, but we look at the next quarter century.
And that's a distinction between what we see sometimes on Wall Street or in other types of short-term investment, where you really just want to look at what's going to make you money by the end of the year or in the end of a quarter, correct?
Frequently, a CEO might be motivated by a bonus, trying to hit a point for the next quarterly profit report. But we want to make sure they're putting the company on a sustainable path to be profitable for the next 10 or 20 years, because that's what families saving for college or people saving for
Yes.
retirement care.
And in the course of your work, have you noticed that short-term profit-seeking behavior is not always consistent with long-term returns for everyday people?
Correctly, the example we used with Purdue Pharma, when they sold highly addictive drugs to Americans, they made money hand over fist. It's a great business model to sell an addictive drug to someone. But until when those people start dying off, their relatives engage in class action lawsuits that sank that company. Or you can have a railroad company that determined we can make more money by cutting staff by 30%. We can add more cars to the rail to make more money. And we don't spend time moving the cars around to distribute load. And then when that railroad has a derailment in Ohio, it costs that company real dollars, because it costs investors, shareholders, and beneficiaries.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, Mr. Frericks, because I think what we're seeing here is that the other side of the aisle is making the argument here that we should just look at the balance sheets, the short-term returns, and the short-term investments in order to make long-term financial decisions. But the irony of that is that this committee right now and in the past has been charged with investigating companies that have abused the public by deliberately leaving critical information off those balance sheets. You've seen that in your work, haven't you, Mr. Frericks?
We've all seen this. I heard it talk about bad data. There was bad data, those false data that sunk Enron. This had nothing to do with ESG. You can look and find bad data anywhere. It's the job of an investor to sort through that data and to look through multiple lenses.
Right. We just lived through this with SBF and FTX. We just saw this 2 years ago. We went through a multi-installment investigation of DuPont's poisoning with respect to PFAS in water. Veterans communities, communities that live around military bases, airports, et cetera, dealing with reproductive cancers, testicular cancers, from information that was withheld from those balance sheets. Norfolk Southern and the train derailment in East Palestine. Those communities are struggling to access information that this company is hiding because it is not necessary to put on their balance sheets. Right now, we are investigating Abbott for baby formula and the issues that were happening with infants dying in baby formula. And that too was kept off balance sheets, but also had financial impacts on the performances of those companies. They had to take that production offline. And so the argument here is that our our investment managers in different states should not take this information into account when making investment decisions for the public. Mr. Frericks, can you really do your job if you're just looking at short-term returns? If your job is for the long-term financial health of people saving for college and retirement?
No, as a fiduciary for families saving for college, for people saving for their retirement, they don't really care so much if a company is profitable next quarter. They care if it is profitable the next 10, 20 years or quarter century.
And so when we talk about where this push is coming from, why now? Why is this happening?
This is happening because the nature of value in companies has changed. We still do traditional financial analysis, but we layer on another level of analysis to deal with these risks, and they are material. They may deal with human capital, they may deal with workers, they may deal with the environment, but they have real-world consequences on the bottom line of these corporations. And if we don't have access to that information, it's like investing with a blindfold on.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of the testimony brings up many of the problems of ESG in the world of finance. Americans rely on a sophisticated financial investment system every day to plan for their future. Yet the complexities of this system allow ESG causes to take precedence over most important thing of all, which is the bottom dollar. The purpose of investments is to grow our financial security, not shrink it. As you and my colleagues have pointed out, investment in ESG funds does not bring higher returns. I would like to focus a little bit on the understanding of what duties proxy advisories currently have and how Congress can actually ensure economic interests legally take precedent. I got the two different sides of glasses. So, Mr. Marshall, in a few sentences, can you talk to me a little bit and define how proxy advisors and proxy voting?
Well, you've seen my colleagues reach out to the two proxy advisor firms to be very critical of the nature of how they do business. Really, what I think much of the fundamental discussion that we're having today is what is a fiduciary? And what is that fiduciary responsibility to those hard-earned Americans who have given their money to be invested? One of the things that is clear is that proxy advisors are acting outside of the direct directive of those particular investors, but instead are making their own independent value judgments about how they vote with regard to certain shareholder initiatives. Clearly, they are connected through various alliances to not only deal with global energy policy, but also a set of preferred societal values. And when we see various shareholder initiatives around issues that don't relate to the bottom line, don't relate to the return for those particular investors, but instead purport to be a political agenda, then they're acting outside of the scope of their responsibility and breaching their fiduciary duties.
Mr. Reyes, what is robo-voting? How does it magnify the power of proxy advisor recommendations? And should Congress consider restricting its use?
Robo-voting, automatic voting has given even more power to the proxy advisor duopoly that is ISS and Glass Lewis. That is part of what we would ask you, Congressman, to look at with regard to proxy voting. The market for proxy advisory firms, as I mentioned and General Martian mentioned, is dominated by two players, Institutional Shareholder Services, ISS, and Glass Lewis, and their combined market share is approximately 97%. So you're looking at predominant market players who influence many of the institutional advisors and asset managers for whom they provide supposedly objective advice for. A study has shown, though, that a significant number of institutional investors simply follow the voting advice of proxy voters. This is like automatic straight ticket voting. It's common sense that proxy advisory firms should focus on providing objective advice related to maximizing value of shares in the companies that are the subject of shareholder proposals and board of director elections. Unfortunately, for these two particular advisors, they again have very public, purposeful statements about what their end goals and objectives are, including retiring coal plants, including transitioning away from fossil fuels and getting to net zero Paris 2015 goals. It's difficult to see and to imagine that they can be entirely neutral and provide objective opinions for those for whom they're serving when they have such strongly stated goals. And when they start every shareholder vote, I think one estimate was they have 38% or so of the votes already locked in. And so it's very difficult to overcome their predisposed decision-making process. So those are all issues that we would like for you to take up in a further hearing with regard to proxy voting.
And Mr. Marshall, if proxy advisors are not acting in the best interests of their shareholders, what current mechanisms are in place to hold them accountable, and what should be accountable to?
One of the things that exists for AGs is under our consumer protection laws, Deceptive Trade Practices Act. I think one of the things that you've seen already is Republican attorneys general have been active on the investigative side using both our consumer protection laws as well as the antitrust laws. Multiple investigations are now pending, and we have the opportunity to be able to report back on those investigations. But as well, I think General Reyes has outlined for this committee various ways that this body can act to be able to rein in what we believe is an unlawful practice.
Well, as somebody who served in state government and the federal government, I appreciate the fact that sometimes you can move more quickly than we can. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Bush from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today for a timely and important hearing to defend the planet itself. The acronym ESG has been used so much today already. that I'd like to remind everyone what it stands for: environmental, social, and corporate governance.
Yeah,
The
please.
relationship between the activities of
Educate us,
giant
girl.
corporations like Microsoft, Apple, and eBay have an immeasurable impact on our society and on our environment. By now, we all know that the health of our planet is fleeting. All you have to do is step outside, feel the seasons getting shorter and the temperatures getting higher. You just have to turn on the news to see the latest natural disaster devastating communities. You just have to listen to the scientists and climate experts who are telling us point blank that it is now or never. Act today or wish you had
I don't think I've ever heard
yesterday.
scientists say that.
My hometown of St. Louis ranks among the highest across the country in rates of asthma, with rates significantly higher for Black residents than white residents. ESG principles are the bare minimum corporations can abide by to protect the communities that serve as their domestic headquarters in cities like St. Louis. The cost of doing business should not be a lifetime of pollution for small towns and cities across this country. Mr. Frerichs, do Republican attacks on responsible investing practices actually increase the waste and mismanagement of taxpayer dollars? Yes or no?
Well,
and if so, how?
I think attacks that limit our ability to consider all factors, to have access to data, costs us. And this has been documented in other states. No, I think there's a misunderstanding of what proxy advising firms do. The secret right there is in the word advisory. They don't make these votes. The fiduciaries make these votes. And if a fiduciary decides to just turn it all over to someone else, that's their choice. But a good fiduciary will rely to their advice and other sources of information. You know, we're part of several coalitions we get information from. The example I like to use is we're trying to get a good, clear picture of these corporations and their profitability over the long term. Now, you notice I wear glasses. I didn't always wear glasses, but the nature of my eyes changed over the last 30 years, and I had to take steps to see better. And when I went to go see an optometrist, they gave me a choice of 2 different lenses and said, which helps you see better? ESGs are different lenses to see. I say, okay, well, first lens helped me see better. They'll show me 2 different ones. And eventually, after looking through several different lenses, we'll get a much clearer picture. That's what ESG data does. It helps us to have a better picture about the long-term profitability of these companies.
Thank you for that. I asked unanimous consent to submit into the record a study by Wharton Business School professor Daniel Garrett and the Federal Reserve economist Ivan Ivanov on the cost of the 2021 Texas law to limit responsible investing.
Without objection to order.
Thank you. Mr. Frerichs, could you briefly summarize the findings of this analysis for us?
Yeah, back in 2021, the state of Texas passed legislation limiting the number of firms they could use for debt issuance. And because they limited some of the largest debt issuers, there was less competition. I find this difficult that I'm the one defending the free market and the ability to have competition and access to data and for shareholders to have rights. Because I think I heard earlier someone mention that asset owners who own utility stocks are telling them what to do, as if that's a bad thing. They are owners of these companies. What they found is by limiting competition, it was costing the taxpayers of the state of Texas an additional $300 to $500 million a year.
Thank you for lending your expertise. Strong labor unions like SEIU and AFL-CIO have fought long and hard to ensure large corporations and bad actors are being held responsible for harming workers. Workers should be able to determine if their state pension funds are being invested responsibly, and ESG principles are an important first step. Now, unions are on the front lines of the fight to hold corporations accountable for their continued pollution of our communities, whether fighting for paid sick leave, livable wages, workplace safety standards, and now ESG principles. We must support strong government regulations and oversight into all activities of large corporations. The federal government has an obligation to provide resources and solutions to the climate crisis at every opportunity. Congress must ensure that with each piece of legislation we put forward, that there is some component to it that addresses the climate crisis. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gruffin.
Thank you,
from
comrade.
Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Sure. Mr. Marshall, can you give some examples of decisions that a business uh, would be kind of muscled into doing is because of strong ESG sort of policies being implemented by, say, major pension funds?
Let me just speak to specific examples in Alabama that we have concerns about. The agriculture industry is obviously very important to us. One of the things being targeted, for example, is the farmers' use of certain types of fertilizer, how it is that they use their land itself, and the products they use to be able to produce what food goes on to the tables of families across our country. So imagine that a farmer is dealing with a member of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance who comes to that farmer and says, as part of our underwriting, we think that you need to be able to change the fertilizer that you're using. We need to be able to change your land management, or else we're not going to
Let me
insure you,
pick
or we're
up.
going to make it cost prohibitive.
Could you see a situation in which, say, a bank is kind of muscled into giving out more loans to people who haven't saved money, for example?
Carson, I think we could not only see that, but we could also see the opposite, right? That we know that the Net Zero Banking Alliance group boycotts certain industries as well as limits funding of certain projects, so that not only could we see a bank coerced to lend in ways they wouldn't previously, but also see the exact opposite, and that is to keep capital from other industries that are suddenly disfavored.
Okay. And that could be both individuals who perhaps have saved a lot of money. Maybe we don't want to give them as loans as much. We know recently we've had situations on a nationwide level in which we try to penalize people who have down payments for things. Will this perhaps affect who people hire? Like right now, there's certain disfavored groups in our society. People don't like men. People don't like, people European background, that sort of thing. Could this be something where you're encouraging businesses not to hire or promote people or have on their board of directors people from unfavored groups, by people who view people as a group and not as an individual?
And also the concern about hostile workplace environments. So there's a great push by ESG proponents to have corporations take policy decisions about societal issues that are occurring today. And to the extent that you're an employee of a certain company that believe very differently than the public position that that corporation has taken as a result of being bullied by ESG proponents, then that concern would be whether or not that employee faces potential
Could you give
harm.
me an example?
Sure. Let's assume that a company's taken a position on the issue of abortion and said that they believe that abortion should be lawful, and yet there's fundamentally employees at that company that believe the exact opposite. Number one, they're going to be stigmatized if in fact they express their particular views, but also the concern is whether or not they're going to be denied opportunities for employment and advancement.
So we just share the wealth here, Mr. Reyes. Would that result in people being discriminated against, say, for a place on a board of directors based on political viewpoint?
Yes, and that's been stated by these organizations. They're not shy about it. They're very forthright, and they said that we will oppose and we will not support directors with certain social or environmental backgrounds.
Wow. What type of potential directors would be hated by this group?
Again, any number of them who don't support, for example, on the social side, racial discrimination audits. And I'll give you an example. There was a traveler's insurance case where a group of activist shareholders, I think it was Trillium Group, forced a shareholder vote on an audit that they demanded, which was a racial profiling audit that would require Travelers Insurance Company to potentially violate state laws in numerous states if the resolution passed.
So these are the type of people who judge people by where their great-great-grandparents came from, and they
Yes, the irony of that is that what they were supporting actually violated anti-discrimination laws. So,
wow. And as the result, companies may have to or will feel pressured to hire people based on these, I call it ancestral criteria. Is that right?
I think that's a fair assumption, Congressman.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a social scientist who's worked on climate and sustainability issues for many years, in fact, all of my career, I actually welcome the discussion today on sustainable investing. As we know, it's crucial to the future of our planet and also our economy. But obviously, that's not what this hearing is actually about. I've watched and listened today and seen as this hearing has devolved into yet another crusade in the political culture wars. But I am disappointed, Mr. Chairman, to see the use of this committee's precious time to
Anybody
air
got
yet
any
another
earplugs?
dark money-funded conspiracy-laden attack on American freedom. But I'm surprised to see that in this case, it's an attack on the market itself. It's amazing to me to see the kinds of attacks we've seen on American freedom by the majority. Attacks on our bodies, banning books, and now we're talking about banning the way that businesses are able to invest their own capital and public bodies. But what's especially amazing about this is how radically out of touch it is with the American public. And
we don't need to hear her. Isn't that interesting how she frames it that way? How we are banning what companies can put out there, what companies can do. When you're actually the one who is advocating forcing companies to put out certain data points so that you can then take it, get someone to recreate it in a card or board behind you and create some sort of chart that shows the information that you want it to show, and therefore go back and affect that company. Interesting. Interesting how this logic works and how they frame it in such a way as this is a wonderful thing. I mean, anybody who's opposed to this just doesn't give a shit about, people who can invest and the information they should be able to get about a company so they know what to invest. And oh yeah, voters oppose government restrictions on ESG. No, we don't. Maybe the crazy left liberals do, but the majority of us, well, the majority of people probably don't even know what's going on. So how could they oppose it? Because they're probably completely uninformed on this particular topic. But the 4 people that she polled in her office amongst her interns oppose government regulations on ESG. The timing of the board, yeah. No, looks like all Democrats do not know how to make charts readable with proper information. The only one who makes really good charts is Mr. Garcia when he brings out the alligator moat, the F-16s, the border guards with guns, and what's the last one? There's one other thing, and I know I'm forgetting it. Oh, the electrified fence, one of my favorites. Yeah. So he made one good board. Other than that, yeah, their boards are terrible and just completely irrelevant. Just fabricated data. Oh, she's making a point. Listen, you need to understand that I don't know anything that I'm talking about, and you can see that. It's very clear. I don't know what I'm talking about. Why should I know? It's not like I'm really doing anything here. I'm just, yeah, it's very hard to be me, to come up with these bullshit excuses. Yeah, so please pay attention to my bullshit excuses.
Charge here. We had talks about how banks are muscling companies. We have seen that. We have seen banks being muscled. Legislation in Texas is muscling banks to invest in the fossil fuel industry. Banks like to be diversified, and if they decided that they wanted to invest in renewable resources, like biofuels from Iowa, or wind turbine blades from Ohio, or solar panels being installed in Arizona, they would be punished for that. That's the real shame here.
Right. So ESG has become another boogeyman in the culture wars. This is not about fiscal responsibility.
Yes.
You know, it's
Bring
evident we're
on the
sitting here in
gators,
the
Chris.
very week that we're
Make 'em
debating
hungry.
a potential default on the American debt ceiling. And yet the GOP is claiming that this is about fiscal responsibility and
Good
fiduciary
Or how she
responsibility to
flies back and
shareholders and the
forth
public.
to her
That is
state
not what this is
on
about.
the weekend.
It is a
Is it a
well-funded,
commercial
dark
jet?
money funded
Probably
culture
not.
war attack, not only on the American economy, but on the American people. And with that, I yield back.
Oh, good. I talked through most of her baloney.
Yields
Okay.
back her time. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. As we have heard today, there are numerous concerns related to so-called environmental, social, and governance policies being indoctrinated into accounts by woke asset managers. Today's hearing will help us better understand what Congress can do to ensure that activist stakeholders will not encourage woke corporate activism, as we have seen recently with Anheuser-Busch, Disney, and even Nike. Because as we all know around here, when you go woke, you go broke. So Attorney General Reyes, for background, could you elaborate on how asset managers can violate their duties by signing ESG pledges?
Sure, there are a number of ways. There are federal laws that could be implicated. There are state laws, including state consumer protection laws, state securities laws. There are common law contractual agreements that fiduciaries can violate. All of those different laws come into play. And one of the reasons why we've filed a lawsuit against the current administration's Department of Labor rule, weakening the fiduciary role and the duty and the responsibility of fiduciaries, is because we think it, among other things, violates major questions, doctrines, violates the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act. So all of those different ways are legal reasons why we're concerned, Congresswoman. When you hold yourselves out as being objective and you represent to your customers and your shareholders that you are being objective, then you must live up to that and not have a predisposed, predetermined end goal in mind. And I'll make one comment. My colleague and my friend, the good treasurer, mentioned proxy advisors don't vote the shares. He's right. But in many ways, they're de facto voters because many of those fiduciaries have so many thousands of different investments that they rely almost solely on the proxy advisors. And when the fiduciaries are part of the same horizontal agreements as the proxy advisors, they're all part of one and the same scheme, there really is no free market in that. And they keep talking about free market, and that's why we're here, because there's nothing free about the coercive nature of these arrangements.
And Mr. Ray, as you stated in your testimony, horizontal organizations are made up of asset managers, banks, and insurance companies. Now, I'm aware several state attorneys generals are investigating several of the net zero banking alliance groups, including JP Morgan Chase. What have those investigations found to date?
Not ready to disclose all of our findings yet, but I will say comfortably enough that we are continuing our investigations, and we hope that you would.
So, Mr. Reyes, considering the Silicon Valley Bank has collapsed and JP Morgan Chase bought the bank, has there been any indication that there's been any involvement in ESG policies that there's been while reestablishing the bank?
There may be, but I'm not willing to comment on that based on our investigations.
Thank you so much. Attorney General Marshall, as the Department of Labor under the Biden administration has considered requiring fiduciaries to consider ESG in employee retirement savings decisions, several 401ks and thrift savings plans allow managers to use their voting rights on behalf of these retirement accounts. A prime example of this is BlackRock. a primarily left-wing activist fund that uses its status as the fiduciary for several investment funds to coerce companies into introducing these ESG politics into their retirement account savings. How can Congress help ensure that these companies are not introducing ESG policies into their investment funds and instead are maximizing returns for future seniors that will need to live off of this money in these accounts?
You know, Congressman, one thing that we heard earlier from one of your colleagues is how partisan this issue is. This body has demonstrated through the Senate by attempting to overturn the new safe harbor rule under ERISA and saying that it was an improper way to consider the investments for 152 million Americans in their retirement accounts. This body can clarify clearly under ERISA the role of a fiduciary, what that means for the investment return of the individuals who have invested their accounts, and make it clear that objective criteria, not subjective ESG criteria, are used for making those decisions.
Thank you very much for that suggested solution. And Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member, and our witnesses. I continue to be surprised by the position of my friends on the other side. Aren't the values of free market a fundamental view of their party? Environmental, social, and governance investing is one critical tool that businesses use to make financially smart investments. This type of investing emphasizes corporate models that are both financially smart and socially good, which is truly a win-win. One aspect of corporate models that is too often overlooked is the governance and social strategies component. These strategies often center around diversity in the workforce, both at executive levels and within a particular organization and throughout the broader industry. The inclusion of people of all Black backgrounds, especially those from marginalized communities, is an essential part of America's corporate success. We thrive as a nation when every one of us is empowered and has an opportunity to succeed. Diverse voices at the table make companies stronger and their products, goods, and services more inclusive and effective. According to a 2019 McKinsey analysis, companies in the top
People of
quartile
Ohio,
for
please,
ethnic
please, I
diversity
beg of
on
you,
executive
please
teams were
stop voting for Ms. Brown.
36% more
She's an
likely
idiot.
to have
And I
above
really
average
don't want to have to sit here and
profitability.
listen to her.
Another study showed that employees are
Not asking for
5.4%
much.
more likely to want to continue working at a diverse company. Clearly, businesses have a moral
All she
obligation
ever
as well
does
as a
is read.
financial
Very
incentive to
rarely
make sure
asks a
there is a seat
question.
at the table for historically
And she
marginalized
just says
groups.
same things that have already
But
been said.
there is still
Brings in,
so much work
you
to be
know,
done. So Secretary
marginalized
Marshall
race
or
of some
Secretary
kind.
Reyes, do you know what percent of the
Asks a question but then answers it herself.
5,403 board members of Fortune 500 companies are women of color?
Congressman, I do not.
No, ma'am.
The answer is 7%. Moving on, this year, the Pew Research Center published a report on
answered it herself.
Black-owned businesses in the United States, which continue to face systemic structural barriers to equal opportunity, including lack of investment. I hope you all will have a chance to read it, and I ask unanimous consent that this be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. Secretary Marshall or Secretary Reyes, can you tell me the percentage of businesses nationwide that are Black-owned?
Congressman, I cannot.
Don't worry, she'll
No,
give you
ma'am.
the answer.
Black-owned businesses make up only 3% of classifiable companies, despite Black Americans making up 12.4% of the U.S. population. Mr. Frerichs, in your experience as Illinois' top investor, how does diversity at all levels of a company help investors meet their fiduciary responsibilities and position themselves for success?
Thank you very much for that question. The research has been fairly clear. And this is not by a left-wing organization. McKinsey is not a left-wing organization. That diversity is good for boards. I heard comments made earlier about discrimination against people from a certain ethnic background, or there are still plenty of white men serving on corporate boards. The vast majority are. But research has shown that homogeneous boards underperform diverse boards. And it's not just the research,
What
it's
research?
common sense.
Where? What
If
is
you
the data?
bring people
Show us the
from the
charts.
same backgrounds, the same educational schools, the same cultural backgrounds together, you're going to find a lot of groupthink. A good board does well when there is discussion and back and forth and differences of opinions. And so diverse boards
That's
reduce
racist. I know
groupthink
a
and
lot of
produce
white
better
people that have
results.
very differing
Thank you.
opinions.
And I would say that that answer demonstrates the need for increased diversity, both within individual corporations and throughout
Let's
the
give her
broader
one, too.
business sector. Yet, unfortunately, punishing companies for these private corporate choices has become an element of the Republican platform from DC to Disney. While historically marginalized communities continue to face unique economic barriers, Republicans oppose corporate freedom to implement strategies for social investment, which even benefits the bottom line. In fact, the Republican platform appears to center around taking away choice, the choice to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, the choice of a woman to have control over her own body, and the choice to read a book and live without the fear of gun violence. I urge my friends on the other side of the aisle to reconsider these misguided priorities. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back her time.
thank
The distinguished gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for your time. Under federal and state law, asset managers owe fiduciary duties to their clients. What does that mean? Well, it essentially means that they put their clients' interests first. This is a concept that is old as time. It's become increasingly clear, however, that asset managers may have violated that fiduciary duty based on your findings to their clients through signing radical ESG pledges. Attorney General Reyes and Attorney General Marshall, you and several other attorneys general, including Alan Wilson from South Carolina, penned a letter to 53 asset managers. In this letter, you said that state and federal laws require these asset managers to act as a fiduciary in the best interests of their clients and exercising due care and loyalty. So today I want to take a quick look at the history of fiduciary. Starting with the basics, the Bible says that no one can serve two masters. The Romans defined a fiduciary as a person holding the character of a trustee or character analogous of a trustee in respect to the trust and confidence involved in it and the scrupulous good faith and candor which it requires. The case of Keach versus Sanford, a 1727 English trust law, holds that a trustee owes a strict duty of loyalty and care so that there can never be any possibility of a conflict of interest under ERISA. A person who provides investment advice has that same fiduciary obligation to provide the advice in the sole interest of the plan participants. It's clear that the history of fiduciary is not a new concept. So why are these asset managers now struggling with that duty? When someone invests their money, they have the intention that this money will grow and that they will get a return on that investment. However, these asset managers are throwing money in support of ESG initiatives that are contrary to those who have those holdings. Attorney General Reyes and Attorney General Marshall, will asset managers be forced to choose between their legal duties to achieve financial returns and ESG policy goals? And can you outline that?
I think clearly there is a conflict. And one of the things that I would identify previously is the role of pension funds in states. And we've had two of our attorneys general, both in the states of Kentucky and Louisiana, in examining the question of fiduciary duty, have concluded the consideration of ESG factors would in fact violate state law. The laws in Kentucky and Louisiana are very similar to the laws throughout our country, very similar to the way that this body has defined fiduciary under ERISA, and has identified that as the sole interest duty of loyalty. Very specifically, the Michigan Supreme Court many years ago said a business corporation is organized and carried out primarily for the profit of stockholders. The role of asset managers is to maximize the return on that investment. Again, particularly for the hardworking Americans who have invested their retirement dollars, their concerns principally is what's going to be there when I'm done. It's not necessarily on some of the factors that are subjective within ESG, but instead to those objective factors that qualify to determine what investment should be recognized. Interestingly, my colleague from Illinois referenced glasses and an optometrist that had given him the glass prescription. An optometrist uses devices to objectively determine what your vision is, to be able to make sure that you have the right glasses, that you're not using the wrong ones. ESG criteria very differently are not objective, they're subjective. And one of the reasons why we know that is the rating agencies themselves can't agree on what the factors should be. And they also score individuals quite differently depending on their subjective view of those companies. One thing that's also clear is that certain subjective ESG factors are in conflict. For example, let's take solar powers. That if you have a company you want to be able to score well because they have converted to solar energy, we also have to recognize that that solar energy is coming from materials and manufactured in China where forced labor practices are not acceptable.
I think
Which
the thing
one
to
do you
me,
favor more?
Attorney General and Attorney General Reyes, I want you to answer this one if you can for me, because I'm crunched for time. But are asset managers required to tell their clients when they enter in these ESG-related pledges? I mean, doesn't that seem to be kind of a problem? Because my understanding is that they do not have to disclose that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I know your time's up, but I didn't.
Are asset managers required to tell their clients when they enter into these ESG-related pledges?
Not currently, and that would be something that the Trump rules that the Department of Labor rule just changed previously required. If it was a tie, and it's an intricate answer, but yes, there had to be transparency and disclosure and an explanation. Those rules have now gone away because of the current administration's hostility again towards that. So. It would be advisable, but there's not a requirement per se. You could read into their fiduciary duty, and I think implicitly there ought to be, but right now there's no statutory duty.
Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Porter from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Attorney General Marshall, we have different political views, but I'm going to predict that we might be able to agree on something right at the outset. I think the United States should have the strongest possible capitalist economy that it can. Do you agree?
I do.
All right.
Agree on
And
that.
capitalism is a lot like democracy. You get choices. And just like a democracy lets you choose between different candidates who may have very different political views, capitalism is supposed to let you choose between more than one product, service, or investment that meets your needs. Do you agree that choice is a fundamental premise of capitalism?
I do not disagree.
All right. Do not disagree. I'm going to take that as agree.
I
All right.
will say it again. I agree with you.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, when you buy a car, what criteria do you look at to make your final decision? What's important to you?
The quality of the vehicle and the cost.
Okay. The car that's best for you may not be the car that's best for me. I drive a minivan and you maybe wouldn't be caught dead in one. For all I know, maybe you're a Tesla guy. In a
I drive a
capitalist-
pickup, Congressman, may make
Well, I
that
was going
clear.
to get to that. You might. I have a lot of constituents who buy low emission vehicles. You may have a lot of constituents who buy trucks to use for towing or hauling. The thought process behind shopping for a car is not so different from the thought process that goes into investing in a company. You gather information to see if you're getting what you want as a consumer, or in this case, an investor. Mr. Marshall, what kind of information would an environmentally conscious investor be looking for? Let's assume that these investors exist. What would they be looking for to make an investment that meets their needs?
I couldn't answer that question for you. I don't know exactly how you define what it is you're talking about.
Okay, so I think they're going to be looking for information about
I know, she
what the
thinks she's
company's
being clever.
policies are to
I mean,
mitigate
we
climate
can all
change
see where she's
risk,
trying to go with
how
this.
they're addressing fluctuating energy
Okay, so
costs
let's
that
just
might
do
be
this.
related to.
All righty. I think we've seen enough of that. And I think when Ms. Porter comes on, it's time to go. But not from the show. Just take that out. There we go. Much better. At least I think so, but you might disagree. I know. I'm sorry that I'm here. I'm sorry. Uh, oh my gosh, now you guys are just being mean. I'm just kidding. Hey now. Hey. Oh my God, that's too funny. I know you guys are just like a second behind me. So when I see your comments, you're still watching like a couple seconds behind. So that's pretty funny. Anyway, okay, so today, what are we here for? We here about your credit score. Did you know that you also have an ESG score? That's right, you do. You do. I do. You do. We all do. And none of us even knew it was happening. Kind of like when communism sneaks into your government and all of a sudden, now you're my comrade. But let's look into this a little bit because people are going to say that's a bit extreme. That's a bit much. It's actually not. But let's look into what I'm talking about. Yes, social credit is a thing, not just in China, but here too in the United States. Went to 1080p when you stopped showing her. Well, thank you. Oh, yes, by 2030. Oh, no, my friend. Now you already have a credit score. Let's look at what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can find it. I think if I share this one, let's see how that looks for you guys. Okay, give me 2 seconds. Let me get this set up. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start with this one. This is the impact investor. How to calculate your individual ESG score. That is right, you have an ESG score. Private companies and banks have been secretly behind the scenes been giving you an ESG score. And that is a compilation of a million different little things that you've been doing that they have been watching. So this goes over a little bit like what is an ESG and also kind of like how it relates to businesses. But they're saying, what are personal ESG scores? Definition and purpose. A personal ESG score evaluates an individual's performance and impact based on 3 main factors: environmental, social, and governance. As ESG criteria assesses a business's sustainability and ethics, a personal ESG score offers insight into a person's commitment to sustainable practices and responsible decision making. Who do you think defines what is responsible decision making? Let me give you a hint. It's not you. The purpose behind personal ESG scores involves promoting more mindful behaviors towards the environment and society. By holding individuals accountable for their actions, these scores encourage better choices and habits. Encourage or force? I'm going to go with force, leading to a positive change on a larger scale. Since this is a relatively new concept, no, it's not. Here in the US it is, but it's not. The current level of transparency is a bit murky. Yeah, I would say that considering nobody even knew about it. In many cases, people are generally unaware they even have an ESG score. For example, consumers who have accounts with Merrill Lynch will be able to view their score, whatever they may be. Lenders will use this system to choose who they extend services or credit. That's right. Lenders can now look at your ESG score and use that in determining whether or not they want to give you credit. The main reason is that companies, including lenders, are graded according to the ESG standards. So, part of the reason why I wanted to watch that hearing, even though it was a year ago, is because what they were talking about then has now bled into general society. The business and prosperity depend directly on their hiring practices, gender diversity, social and environmental impact, and other ESG factors. And they must prove their case. They must also show that their clients meet the standards they are being graded. So it is no longer just the companies. No longer just the companies. Okay, so the connection to ESG and investing, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Assessing personal ESG scores, rating agencies, and tools. To assess your personal ESG score, you can turn to various rating agencies and tools that specialize in evaluating individual environmental, social, and governance risks and impacts. These entities focus on offering comprehensive insights into your ESG related activities, credit reports, and public reports. As a result, investors and organizations can better understand your risk profile and commitment to sustainable practices. So, your commitment to sustainable practices is now going to be a factor in obtaining a loan, let's say. The evaluation process. During the assessment, your personal ESG score is calculated based on three main factors: environmental, social, and governance. Your purchase history, sales history, public records, such as your credit report, are considered to gauge the impact on your environment and society. This helps highlight areas where you can improve your ESG performance or showcase your dedication to sustainable and ethical practices. Environmental. So they kind of give you a brief rundown on what each of these are. This aspect examines your carbon footprint, energy consumption, and waste management practices. 2, social, charitable contributions, community engagement, and employment practices are assessed here. So where you work is a part of your grade. Governance. See, because where you work tells them whether or not are you working for a company with sustainable practices. And if you're not working for a company with sustainable practices, that says something about you. Therefore, like forcing the person to go work for companies with sustainable practices, therefore forcing companies to have sustainable practices. Do you see the cycle that they do here? How they force this all to happen very quietly and behind the scenes, but that's exactly what they're doing. And governance. This component considers your ethical behavior, i.e., do you buy a gun? Decision making, transparency, and regulation adherence. Key issues for consideration. ESG rating. Understanding your criteria and methodology rating agencies use to evaluate your performance. This helps you address potential gaps in your sustainability efforts. Your scores. Familiarize yourself with the range of scores and ratings, as this will provide context where you stand compared to others. That's right. Individuality and independence is no longer a value in the United States of America. No. You need to compare yourself to others. Investors. Keep in mind that investors increasingly consider personal ESG scores when making investment decisions. Displaying a commitment to sustainability can lead to greater trust from investors. Rating agency. Choose a reputable rating agency with expertise in environmental, social, and governance assessments. This will ensure that your ESG evaluation is accurate and reliable, except that it's already happening without you even knowing about it. Regularly update your ESG related activities and information to reflect your sustainability efforts accurately. In other words, tell the government what you're doing so they know at all times what you are up to. Again, independence, no longer there. Be transparent about your ESG performance and share your progress with relevant stakeholders to demonstrate your dedication to sustainable practices. Sounding like communism yet? Okay, so let's go down a little bit. What is my ESG score? There are a few different places you can check to find your score. If you hold an account at a major firm, such as Merrill Lynch, your personal ESG score will be listed on your account with your other personal details. You can also check any of the main ESG monitoring company websites. Usually you must create an account or contact them directly to get information regarding your score, because God forbid it be your score. If you're not an investor or you don't have a big financial account, it can be difficult to get your score from traditional places. However, you can calculate your score to understand how companies view you sustainably. Key components of personal ESG scores. Environmental factors. So these are the 3 factors. They're going to get into them in just a little more detail. Your personal ESG score starts with environmental factors. These factors illustrate how your actions contribute to climate change and environmental degradation. A major aspect to consider your company's carbon emissions and footprints, which encompasses your energy consumption habits, transportation choices and consumption of goods with high environmental impact, such as meat or fossil fuels. Do you eat beef? Do you have a car that runs on gas? Sorry, guys. You can work on reducing your carbon footprint by using energy efficient appliances and light bulbs, incorporating renewable energy sources into your home, purchasing locally produced and sustainable goods, opting for public transportation, or using electric or hybrid vehicles. Note, every single one of these things costs more than the alternate version of them, of the what do you want to call them, non-sustainable version of them. Social factors play an essential role in your personal ESG score. This category evaluates how you contribute to societal well-being through your actions, behavior, and choices. Key aspects include diversity. Embrace and support diversity in your personal and professional relationships. Are you dating a white Christian? Human rights. Be aware of your impact on the well-being of others and seek to promote human rights through responsible consumer choices, i.e. buying fair trade. Read more money. And participate in charitable activities and community engagement. Get involved in local initiatives geared towards improving the quality of your life, in your community, such as volunteering, supporting local businesses, or attending public meetings. And now we get down to governance factors are crucial components of your personal ESG score. But what are they? They involve assessing your commitment to ethical practices, transparency, and fairness in your personal and professional life. Transparency, that word really bothers me because, how do I put this? My life is none of the government's fucking business. There's your transparency. Consider the following aspects to improve your governance score. Decision making. Practice deliberate and transparent decision-making processes in both your personal and professional settings. Ethical behavior. Maintain integrity and honesty in all your actions, avoiding conflicts of interest and embracing accountability. I am honestly telling you, federal government, that my life is none of your fucking business. Compliance. Adhere to relevant laws, regulations, and industry standards that govern your personal and professional activities. By considering these environmental, social, and governance factors, you can better understand and work towards improving your ESG score. Remember that your actions, however small, play a part in building a more sustainable and equitable world. Hunger Games, anyone? Does that not just sound like something that would be in the Hunger Games? This goes into how to calculate these things, assessing personal ESG scores, rating agencies and tools, the evaluation process, key issues for consideration. Let's see. And application, challenges and criticisms of personal ESG scores. Greenwashing. Greenwashing is a significant challenge in the world of ESG scores. It occurs when companies or individuals intentionally exaggerate their positive environmental, social, or governance practices to appear more responsible than they truly are. As an investor, you must be cautious about relying solely on ESG scores, as they may not always reflect accurate and comprehensive information. Oh, Lord. Okay. Are ESG scores used by financial institutions? Yes. Yes. Let me repeat. Yes. ESG scores are increasingly being used by financial institutions when assessing investment opportunities or risk management. They use these scores to align their investment portfolios with their values or comply with regulatory requirements. So again, this is where we get into the cycle. They are going to be required under regulations to have, sustainable, green, let's just say, to lump it all together, practices, including their clients, which means that if we want to have, say, a loan from the bank, need to also comply to those regulations. And we have to use other companies and or work for companies that also comply with those regulations. So even if those companies aren't necessarily falling under those regulations, in this very subversive, underhanded way, they've created this cycle where everybody and everything has to comply. Yeah. What do you guys think of this? How do you find it, the score? Let me see if it gives like an app or something. Let me see if it says what. I mean, like I said, if you have Merrill Lynch, you should be able to look for it. Let me see if it gives you any options as to who you can go to find out. It just says you can turn to various rating agencies. I don't know other than let's see, ESG rating agency. Let's see. The 9 best ESG rating agencies. Who gets the grade? Does this do personal ESG rating agents? Rating Dun and Bradstreet. That's for companies, company level. Sustainalytics. That's a terrible name. ESG risk ratings. Let's see. As a subsidiary of Morningstar, one of the largest stock market data providers in the world. It doesn't say if it says they're one of the top firms in reporting and data for ESGs. It doesn't say if they just do companies or if they also do personal. So that might be one. Sustainalytics. Bloomberg. Human capital. Maybe. Human capital and shareholders' rights. FTSE Russell's ESG ratings. I think that is more company. Provides company, country, and fund ratings, as well as data and analysis across the full range of sustainable investments. S&P Global. I'm not sure. You might have to just do a search on how to find your organizations on how to find it. Like they said, it might be difficult unless you have unless you're a client of some of these bigger agencies. But let me see. They had where you can kind of evaluate your own. Let me see if I can find the link. Yeah, Merrill Lynch. You and sustainability. Is this where you can? This is just economic, what are the 3 models, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I'm not seeing it. I would say just see if you can do a search probably where you can do that and look for it. Chris Martin says, I think I'm going to buy an electric minivan and wear a nice dress when I go pick up my Soylent groceries. Perfect. You should be able to get a loan, no problemo. Just make sure that the company that you work for is using green measures to put out fires, whatever that might be. Take your net worth, subtract your social security number, voila. Probably sounds about right. Yeah. Now, who runs these companies and who's connected? That is accurate. Let's see. JBW says, is this the same thing that will they limit how much meat you can buy based on your score? I don't know where they can limit how much meat you can buy. I don't know. I'm not sure. They're not kind of outwardly talking about it that much yet. But hold on. I have another. Oh, shoot. I do want to keep doing that. I have another one that I want to show you, another article. And let's see if they say anything different. So this is Diginex. All you need to know about your personal ESG score. Are you a company manager, entrepreneur, or leader and want to get better picture of targeted investors, clients, or partners? Perusing their credit rating might not be enough. In addition, you need to get the right personal ESG score of the subject to make the right decision. A personal ESG score works like a credit score, but it differs fundamentally because it rates an individual's ESG risks. In this post, we dig deeper into these crucial metrics. What is it? We already know. How do you calculate? Let's see. Maybe this one will tell us better. The process of calculating a personal ESG score works like that of a company rating. However, the scale of assessment or data involved to determine the score is lower compared to that of a business. Here are some of the things that companies factor in when calculating. Energy choice. What type of energy does your subject use? If she uses fossil fuels at home, they didn't have them in there, or they. If they uses fossil fuels at home and in other activities, the personal ESG score will be pretty low. However, people who use clean energy choices such as solar power and wind energy can help boost their score. Transportation habits. The transportation habits of a person also come in handy in defining how sustainable his or her life is. For example, you might want to determine if the person travels to and from work daily using a personal car or public means when calculating his or her score. What about weekend travels? Does the person under review travel abroad often or mainly towards local destinations? Environmental impacts on the subject's job. This is another important aspect when determining a personal ESG score of an investor. If the person's work has a negative ESG impact, the personal ESG score will be low. See, again, therefore, the company you work for also affects your personal ESG score. For example, a person with a business that is always in conflict with the law for poor waste disposal or violating human labor regulations will get a very poor score. However, people who are committed to helping improve the environment and supporting communities should be rewarded. The rest of you guys are pieces of shit. For example, does the person under consideration support local or international initiatives for biodiversity restoration? Can he or she demonstrate programs initiated to empower communities? Investing in investment. A person's investments can also help map his or her ESG score. Do you have stocks in fossil fuels? Terrible. Terrible. And your carbon footprint. Work with, oh, there you go. You can look at diginex.com. Looks like they can help to make your personal ESG ratings accurate. Did you know that the main items that are factored in calculating a personal ESG score, there is one more thing, getting the right ESG sustainability software. Of course. This is a program that allows you to pull together all the ESG parameters and determine the score with a high degree of accuracy. At diginex.com, we have all the apps that you might need for the accurate calculation of your shitty score. Top apps such as Diginex ESG and Diginex Lumen allow you to accurately track the subject activities and calculation of your personal imprisonment score. We also have the expertise you might need to craft the right strategies for ESG assessment and scoring. No matter what your ESG management needs are, know that Communex can help. Talk to one of our comrades on the contact page for more assistance. Isn't that lovely? Well, there you go. Diginex can help you. Hey, I employ ethically sourced local employees. I have no doubt. What is restoration? That is when you have a really shitty ESG score. So let's say, wild and crazy, you drive a car that runs only on gas. Your house is run by oil heat. You work at a company that isn't great with sustainable practices. You buy a gun. You buy pillows from the dude on TV, the pillow guy, the My Pillow guy who looks like a youth pastor because he got a cross hanging out. You're dating a white Christian girl. You, my friend, probably have an ESG score that is terrible. So you need to restore your ESG score so that you can get a loan. Yeah. They want to segment us. Feed me, Seymour, says Algos. Yes. Yes. Also, I should probably mention by watching shows such as this, your score is now in the crapper. Sorry, everyone. My employer relies on people making larger carbon footprints. True. True, true, true. No elected official will help us. Honestly, it's up to us to grind this silliness down to the level it should be. Just say no. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But Snoop says, hope there is someone working to repeal this crap. You know what? There might be. There are a couple of really good people in Congress who I do believe, like Nancy Mace, I believe, she truly is trying to fight and help the people, but there's only so many of them. That's the problem. No one person in Congress can make a really big difference. You need to have a group working together with you in order to pass legislation. So that's the difficult part. ESG score plummets every time you eat beans. Breaking news. Boop, 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 boop. Yes, you too can contribute to methane in the environment. We're screwed. Truth. True, true, true. So, had you guys known that you have an ESG or AKA a social credit score? Had anybody? Oh, XJ, that score just plummeted. Plummeted. You're now negative 20. I don't know what the scores go by, but a group working together. You mean like a party? I think he means like we the people kind of situation. That's what I'm going with. That's where I'm taking that one. Yeah, it's terrible, guys. It is absolutely terrible. And I'd never heard of this. I had never heard that. I mean, I'd heard of ESG scores for companies. MAGA. Snoop is now at -40. But did you know that you have a personal ESG score? And does it seem right to you that companies can do this behind your back without you knowing? And also, where are they getting the information from? I mean, granted, if it's financial institutions, they're clearly combing through your purchases. But where are they getting the rest? Maybe they're looking to see what utilities you're paying, and they must be getting information from social media somehow. Is there such a thing as privacy anymore? Yep. I really wish we could check everyone's score in chat and award the lowest scores. That would be me. I host the show. I'd be the lowest right here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. Info is likely coming from China. Probably. China, probably in cahoots. Well, Biden did talk to Xi again, so he's like, yay, Xi Jinping, tell me, now that we're getting these scores, what are we going to do with them? Yeah, I'm sure they're working together on this one because he probably is totally digging the government over there. American privacy went away with the Patriot Act. Yeah. Is anyone else just as pissed off as me at the name of that one? How many honest companies are left in this country? I'm gonna go with 0. 0. Cookies track us as we use the computer. Yep. 0 plastic in my life. Cash or check. That's good. That is smart. Was the Oyster Bunny there too? Yes, it was Joey Biden, Xi Jinping, and the Oyster Bunny. They got together. Yes, yes. Yeah. So there it is, my friends. We are one step closer to the communist states of America. We gonna let that happen? It's already happening. And I really enjoy putting the hammer and sickle up for AOC and Cory Bush. But the reality is they are socialists. They have no qualms in admitting outright that they are socialists, and yet they continue to be reelected. We have a problem in this company, or in this company. It is a company in this country. We need to reclaim the republic. Hashtag reclaim the republic. And bring it back to what it used to be. Jamie Raskin was talking about, well, this isn't a free market, and that, by doing this, by not forcing these companies to give us this information, that's not a free market. They are twisting everything they're telling you and making it sound like they're doing these things for the good of the people. Anytime they're telling you they're doing something for the good of the people, they're not. It's opposite day in their world all the time, every day, opposite day. Judge, jury each other with this and segregate. Yeah, I mean, it really it is. Yeah. I don't think they will allow it to be called the Communist States of America. Too close to CSA, wrong kind of red flags. United Communists of America, maybe. The U, what would that be? The UCA? Is there anything UCA? 0 credit score. Who cares? We're gonna be like the what was that movie? The Divergent, where they have the kind of the people that are like the deplorables. I don't know if they were called the deplorables. I think they might have been, or the I can't remember, but it's the people that didn't fit into any of the factions. Did anybody else watch those movies? They're pretty good. I liked them. But that's sort of what we're headed towards, I think, if we don't put our foot down. And I don't know what that's going to take, but it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty. Undesirables. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Rebellion 1776, you should do a video review of 1776 by Playboy the Beast, or not. Just seems fitting. I've never seen it. I'll go check it out. Playboy the Beast. Should I be scared of it? But I'll go check it out and we'll see what they say. Well, if it's 1776, it's got to be fairly good, right? Intergalactic Federation of Anglers. There we go. There we go. Sounds very good. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining me. Keep your credit scores, your social credit scores, high in the air. Oh, he was a J6 political prisoner? Oh, I'll definitely go watch it. It's just called 1776 or Playboy the Beast. I'll go look it up. Playboy the Beast. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely watch that. I find that absolutely fascinating. At least my credit score is higher than Nancy's blood alcohol content. You must have a very high credit score then. Very high. Like, very high. But, all right, guys. And yeah, I will definitely go check that out. R3D, that sounds really fun. And we are looking for people to interview. So if anybody has any suggestions, please feel free to either email me, put them in the comments, probably down below under the video is the best place for me to see them. Yeah, 108 proof for real. So any comments or any suggestions would be great. And because I do want to start getting back into doing some interviews, I think that would be a lot of fun. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. You know what? There's nothing we can do about these social credit scores right now unless you really want to go through all of that, which I don't, because you know what that then does? It turns you into the person they want you to be. So be you, stay independent, don't give in, reclaim the republic, people, and enjoy the updated picture of Eggy, the patriotic chicken, on the outro. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.
Scattering leaves, the days go, dragging us along like ragdolls. Make these moments move faster. It's our latest disaster. There's no place I'd rather be anyway. This will do for a while. Gather your thoughts so we can run away from it all and ease our minds. We'll try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Leave nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Leave nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Scattering leaves, the days go, dragging us along.